嗯，Hello，大家好。我係 Wesley，我係 Nap Studio 嘅 founder 啦，同埋亦都係今年 Detour Exhibition 嘅 designer。咁我哋今日好榮幸咁樣可以邀請到Otto 啦、Lab 嘅 founder 同埋 Eugene 係今屆 Detour 其中一個 artist 去講今日嘅題目，which is about 其實 inspire spaces 同埋 auspicious design。咁我諗最初 set 呢個題目設計環境同埋設計運氣呢個 topic 嘅時候呢，其實都環繞住好多，即係因為始終喺香港啦或者亞洲嘅地區呢，其實無論係發覺喺香港又或者喺韓國都好呢，都好多風水或者大家會諗到好多關於 spiritual 靈修又或者一啲迷信嘅嘢啦。咁但係喺設計上面嚟講，其實嗰個關係喺邊度呢？咁我哋今日主要就係討論緊呢兩樣嘢嗰個互動性。咁我諗簡單啲一開始呢，其實即係大家熱下身咁樣去講一講個 topic 先啦。第一個問題其實係其實兩位嘉賓對於文化或者信仰點樣去影響設計，有啲乜嘢嘢嘅睇法呢？
In so in my design, it's because I've grew up in the West, but with a Asian background. I try to mix things in my design, but in terms of what I know of the cultural beliefs in Korean design, looking at this slide now, also Pesanimsu, which is I don't know how you say it in Chinese, but with the river at the front and the mountain at the back. That's also how a lot of the traditional Korean housing is built, with hanoks, but also the palaces. It's very important, and that's how I. Is this mic okay?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, so that's how the Korean architecture is built.
Okay.
咁我係生長喺一個亞洲背景啦，然之後我就會好想喺我嘅設計裏面咧融合中西嘅一啲元素。咁喺韓國嘅文化裏面咧，我哋有一個設計理念咧，因為就唔知用英文點講啦。咁其實就係前面有水，咁後面有山。咁同埋好多嘅理念都係基於一個韓屋，我哋嗰間嗰種設計嘅理念去做。
So in general, I think design is deeply related to the social, cultural, and historical context of each project. So for every project, as a designer, as an architect, we try to understand the brief very fully, to really know about the context of the project, the people of the project, when we do a design. So feng shui is part of it. 咁我哋好多唔同嘅項目裏面啦，我哋會考慮到好強烈就係個 project 本身個文化啦、個社會啦，同埋佢嘅佢啲人嘅定位啦。譬如無論係個客人本身啦，定係個project 嘅用家，佢哋有啲咩嘢嘅要求啦，包括咗佢哋嘅信仰啦，包括咗佢哋文化啦，都係非常之重要嘅。而風水當然亦都係其中一個我哋要考慮嘅嘢咯。
咁其實另一個問題就係咧，大家會唔會有啲比較 personal 啲嘅 cases 係關於其實風水或者一啲信仰上面，其實點樣可以塑造一啲空間，又或者設計，甚至乎係藝術作品
？Okay. So Wesley asked about like how feng shui impacted our designs. So this is one
personal like experience or
personal experience. Okay. So I think I really wanted to start with K11 Museum, because in this project it is like widely rumored as a feng shui project, but in fact it's not. So 好多人都會覺得 K11 Musea 因為好多人會好多傳言啦，話好多 ideas 係好風水 driven 嘅，或者好多所謂符號學啊、咩神學啊去 drive 個 design 嘅。咁我想喺今日就話俾大家聽，其實係冇啲咁嘅事嘅。咁so a lot of people may think that like why do we have two skylines? Is it because it looks like a pair of eyes, things like that, or why are we having so many curves in the project? Is it like imitation of some organisms? 咁好多人會問點解會有兩個天窗啦？係咪一對眼咧？定係好多曲線啦？係咪一啲咩嘅生物嘅代表咧？咁其實都唔係嘅。咁 okay, so because in the design, the two circular skylight was meant to be one. However, because of the structural limitations, they have to split into two, and then there's big beams across. So 其實本身都唔係因為要做兩個天窗嘅，本身係得一個啫。但係因為結構方面嘅考慮，做唔到兩個天窗，所以佢要拆咗唔可以做一個，要拆咗兩個。And in a lot of our designs, nowadays we use a lot of curvatures. It is not big. It is the reason for having curvature in this design particularly is to have a sense of nature in the interior space, and also trying to create like articulation to the cultural events. For example, this was a ballet show that happened on the escalator within our sculpture at the escalator. 好多時呢一啲設計都用咗好多曲線啦。咁譬如喺呢個設計裏面，我哋好想融入自然嘅，而另一方面好想同啲文化活動起關係嘅。咁好似譬如右手邊嗰幅就見到個芭蕾舞嘅舞蹈員跳嘅動作，就會同我哋成個曲線嘅 sculpture 其實好吻合嘅。So in the past, there are lots of people having a lot of reactions to buildings or sculpture with curvatures. They often think that they look like a kind of organisms. But these kind of rumors was less in the past than what we have now. So nowadays, like Wesley also do things that have curved surfaces or curved geometries. It's basically because we can do it now. So in the past, under the modernism thinkings and under the limited technology that we had in the past, we couldn't do a lot of curvatures. But nowadays, because technology permits us to explore more on the geometrical adventures, so we can do a lot more than just rectilinear forms. 係啦，以前就因為局限於個科技啦、個建築科技啦，同埋以前一啲無論係 classicism 或者 modernism， 即係現代或者係古典主義嘅一啲教學啦，咁好多嘢都好四四方方、平平穩穩，就算一個圓都係好正圓嘅。咁但係而家嘅科技啦，同埋而家 contemporary 而家當代嘅一啲建築嘅理論啦，我哋可以更加自由咁去做我哋嘅建築出嚟，所以好多時我哋會做咗好多唔同嘅 form 出嚟咯。And then throughout the K11 Musea project and Victoria Dockside project, we actually widely use the urban nature as the inspiration that guides us through the entire designs. Okay. Okay. And so 喺個 K11 Musea 裏面，我哋用咗好多唔同嘅自然元素啦，咁去做我哋成個嘅設計嘅。咁當中其實有好多其實喺畫面度見到啦，有啲可能同啲樹有關啦，有啲可能同啲蘭藤植物有關啦，有啲亦都可能係一啲樹嘅隧道咁樣。咁我哋其實成件事都想做一個好融入自然、好舒適嘅環境。咁其實呢樣嘢都係對我哋嚟講，可能 sort of 都係風水啦，因為會希望製造一個好自然、好舒適嘅環境俾大家。
We incorporate nature in the shopping mall K11 because we want to provide a very comfortable environment for everybody, and it kind of related to feng shui in a sense.
Oh, sorry, one more. OK，我唔記得呢個 slide。咁其實呢個 slide 就係講緊我哋好多唔同嘅設計啦。就算設計到一個公眾嘅洗手間都好啦，咁我哋希望有好多充分嘅陽光啦、充分嘅空氣啦，亦都有自然嘅植物、自然嘅材料啦。咁希望就係透過呢一啲唔同嘅建築嘅元素，去令到整體嘅空間你會覺得好舒適。咁對於我哋嚟講，其實風水就要達到你會覺得好自在、好舒適、好和諧嘅一個空間設計。
We have many designs. Even it is a public toilet, we want to provide sufficient sunlight and air to it. And the main concept of feng shui is to offer comfortable environments for the people and the users.
Eugene. Sure.
So my first interest in feng shui was because my mother is an interior designer, and I also work with her sometimes, and we find clients coming to us with some interesting questions and ways to solve problems. Because in Korea, yes, a lot of people believe in feng shui, but also a lot of people don't. But there are some traditions in Korea where, for example, with a sunflower painting, it's tradition to gift someone who has just moved into a new house a sunflower painting because it will bring you wealth. And when you type into Naver, which is the Google of Korea, and you type in painting that will make you rich, this is the painting that comes up. Apples and sunflowers. Yeah.
我嘅媽媽係一個室內設計師啦，所以其實我細細個咧就已經接觸到風水呢啲嘢，因為佢有啲好有趣嘅客人咧，就會問啲好得意嘅問題啦，跟住又有啲好有趣嘅解決方案。咁咧喺韓國咧，我哋送一個禮物俾一啲新入伙嘅家庭嘅時候咧，通常就會有一個向日葵嘅一幅畫啦，因為係可以為佢哋帶嚟好運嘅。如果你哋喺韓國好似類似好似 Google 咁樣嘅搜尋引擎網站上面咧，你就去揾有啲咩畫係可以為人帶嚟財運咧，咁第一個出嚟嘅咧就會係呢種畫啦。
So when, as a designer, when you want to design a nice space, a lot of the time when it's, as Otto said, a space that makes you feel comfortable. And when you have a nice interior and then you have a painting like this, sometimes it can be a bit of an eyesore. So then one of the clients, they got gifted this painting by their in-laws, so they couldn't throw it away, and they wanted it to be there, but also be there when the in-laws came to visit, but also when they were just living by themselves. They didn't want this painting. So we came up with the idea of making it double-sided, one side a mirror and one side a sunflower painting, so that when the in-laws came, they would flip to the sunflower painting, and then when they weren't there, it would be a mirror again. In-laws, like the husband's parents.
Oh, in-laws.
Yeah,
I see.
in-laws.
咁
Okay, so we made the clients got gifted this present, but they didn't want it in the interior, so we made it double-sided. One side a mirror, one side a sunflower painting. So when the in-laws came, they flipped to this side, and then the other side when they were there.
咁咧我哋有個客咧就想係喺佢嘅外父外母嚟嘅時候咧，先至展示呢幅畫啦。咁所以咧，我哋就做咗個設計咧，就係一邊係呢幅畫，另一邊就係鏡嚟嘅。咁佢外父外母嚟探嘅時候咧，佢哋就會反轉啦，咁就唔係佢哋就會即係用翻呢幅畫嘅畫面咁就對翻住，咁就展示咗呢幅畫出嚟。咁但係咧佢哋外父外母離開嘅時候咧，咁佢哋就會反翻轉嗰幅畫，咁佢哋就見唔到呢幅畫啦。
Yeah, so I mean, feng shui is all about feeling comfortable in your home, and if this is not what you want, although you got gifted this and it's meant to represent, wealth, it doesn't really work. So I think it's all about the client and what the client wants. It's about adapting what you have and how you can get around the problems.
因為有啲人信，有啲人又唔信，咁所以咧，其實我哋要做嘅咧就係要適應啦，睇下點樣可以處理到我哋客人嘅需求咯。我哋主要咧就係為咗解決問題嘅啫。
咁其實頭先 Eugene 已經 touch upon 咗少少我哋想講嘅一樣嘢，就係其實點樣去 balance design 同埋 users， 因為當有陣時風水或者玄學或者啲你相信一啲信念上嘅嘢啦，其實有陣時你可能太過執着於嗰一樣嘢，因為譬如我 personally 自己其實以往都曾經試過做一個 interior design 喺香港，咁發生咩事呢？就係嗰個 client 就揾咗一個師傅啦，咁嗰個師傅係佢真係太過即係完全要 buy into 佢嗰套嘢嘅時候咧，咁結果做咗啲咩咧？就係佢喺一個香港，其實所有大家啲 unit 知道正常都唔係好大㗎啦，但係佢又要將好多唔同嘅房門同房門之間要有特別嘅角度啦，然後佢亦都有啲可能即係個廁所又唔可以對住個睡房，個睡房又唔可以對住個廳嗰啲咁樣嘅嘢。結果咧喺一個好細嘅 unit 入邊扭到咧有一條好奇怪嘅 corridor 出嚟，就成個迷宮咁樣啦。咁而我自己當其時，因為其實個客人仲要係我中學同學嚟嘅，咁我就要去advise 翻佢，即係我覺得，因為我自己本身都其實我都好 spiritual 嘅。如果你問我自己，即係我又中意儲水晶啊，又睇塔羅，又睇星座嗰啲，但係睇呢一個層面上，我會覺得其實係反而因為嗰個人太過執着於呢樣嘢咧，反而佢 give up 咗一啲好簡單嘅一啲生活上嘅一啲logic 啊，即係冇咗 common sense。我覺得咁樣其實都唔 work，因為某程度上對於我嚟講，所有玄學或者靈修學上面嘅嘢，最重要係你要 feel 到嗰樣嘢 empower 到你自己。因為當你如果完全去迷信於呢樣嘢而 give up 咗你嘅 power 嘅時候，我覺得好似喪失咗佢本身應有嘅意義，反而因為你就會俾其他人去任意去控制或者 dictate 你所有嘅決定咯。所以最重要，我反而覺得係你點樣可以藉住呢啲嘢去令到你自己去到都俾到你自己一啲方向，但係其實你都要明白，最後做決定嘅其實都係你自己咯，因為即係 design 一樣。所以 at the end 就係我同佢解釋咗，其實你咁樣係唔 work 㗎，因為你咁樣會浪費咗好多空間，而做出嚟其實你亦都唔會舒服咯，喺嗰度住得，因為啲嘢變到好三尖八角咯。咁但係當然咁，佢最後就即係就算我同佢咁 friend 都好，佢冇相信我講嘅嘢，然後我就話咁我話咁算啦，我話咁即係你就跟師傅個 design， 但係其實你就唔使揾我做個 designer 啦，咁係啦。咁我覺得呢樣嘢頭先 Eugene 都係講咗呢樣嘢。咁我都想問下 Otto 自己有冇啲 experience 係你其實點樣去 balance 一個 design 同埋個即係或者風水啊，或者玄學上嘅一啲
好啊
element。
我會想 share 一個 project 咧，係近期做嘅。我睇翻先。咁其實呢個係一個美術館嚟嘅，一新美術館。咁佢係一個中國文化藝術嘅美術館嚟嘅。其實好得意嘅一個 project，因為我本身我嘅 disclaimer 係我唔係話好熟風水呢樣嘢。咁但係喺呢個 project 裏面學多咗好多嘅。咁因為佢哋本身係呢個一新美術館係一個機構，佢好着重中國傳統文化藝術，咁所以其實喺設計嘅時候，我哋都用咗風水為我哋整體個設計規劃嗰個藍圖嘅一個好重要考慮嘅元素咯。咁其實得意嘅就係最簡單嘅風水學就係五行咯。點樣可以將呢 five elements 呢五行去做一個 balance？ 點樣可以好和諧共生？咁會黑色箭嘴係講緊一個會 benefit 另一個，即係會令到可能金會生水，就係令到水狀態嘅人會好啲。咁另外對翻住就係譬如水又會克火，就會 against 佢。咁所以要做一個和諧空間咧，我哋就要喺每一個 element 大家 beneficial 嘅 element、complementary element 就去做一個組織咯。
I would like to share a project with you. It is the Sun Museum. It is a museum about Chinese culture, so we incorporate a lot of Chinese traditional elements in the architectural design. And these are the most important elements. We try to create a harmonious area with all those elements. Like we try to employ the relationship between those five elements to create a more comfortable environments for visitors.
咁喺個設計裏面咧，我哋就將一啲 將新嘅 element 啦，就去組織成個 journey 啦，成個 circulation 啦。咁由土去生金就金又生水，水就生木，木就生火，火就生翻土，去做咗一個循環，去設計整體成個 museum 嘅個 visitor experience 啦，同個 circulation 嘅。
We designed the whole journey or the circulation in the museum totally based on the relationship between the 5 elements. For example, earth facilitates the creation of metal and metal facilitates the creation of water. So it goes very smoothly in the museum.
咁成個博物館嘅呢個博物館嘅兩層嘅設計啦，由下面嘅cafe 茶室嘅位置啦，到一條金色嘅樓梯啦，到上面有3個主要嘅展廳，一個係藍色，一個係綠色，一個係紅色。而去到後面呢，就有洗手間嘅位置啦，咁都會用翻下面嘅一個奶油白淺啡色嘅。咁整體嚟講係一個5行平衡嘅一個佈局咯。
So above the cafe are 3 main exhibition halls, and all the colors are designed to facilitate the harmony among the 5 elements.
And then 喺呢個過程裏面呢，其實我哋嘅客人呢，佢哋好想去表達呢啲顏色嘅。咁 in a way 可能你會見到太多即係有5隻彩色喺度，係啦，咁就未必係真係咁和諧嘅視覺上。咁我哋喺個討論之中呢，我哋都會想再執着啲，將中國嘅文化希望可以顯示到喺呢一度。咁我哋同客人討論之間呢，就做咗一啲研究啦。咁去喺中國歷史裏面一啲出名嘅藝術品，尤其是係瓷器嘅釉，即係佢嘅上面上嘅彩色，去為我哋嘅一個根據嘅一個 inspiration 咯。
And the client wants to highlight the color, but sometimes if we put every color into one area, it might not look so harmonious. So we did a lot of research. We want to use the Chinese traditional elements in the design. So we got inspiration from the colors of ceramics, the porcelain of traditional China.
係啦，咁少少介紹翻嗰啲 porcelain 啦，中間天藍色嘅，好似雨後天藍色嘅，就係好出名嘅魚池啦。跟住隔離嘅有龍窯啦，有青色嘅龍窯啦。跟住再側邊有紅色，就係一啲鐵紅色啦，咁好似夕陽下嘅海嘅紅色啦。咁最後定窯嘅奶白色，亦都係來自北宋嘅定窯嘅奶白色。咁4種都係來自唔同朝代嘅一啲常見嘅一啲瓷器藝術品嘅顏色咯。
You can see all those porcelains are in different colors. The one in blue, like sky, and the one in red. And there is one with a creamy white color, and they are all from different dynasty in ancient China.
I think I have another quick video to show you. Maybe that can be played now, and then I'll talk about it after we watch it.
有條片播俾大家睇睇先嘅。
How to place a bed in Feng Shui. First golden rule. Never point your feet towards the door. This makes you very vulnerable and it also means that you will die. Never sleep against a window because it means that there is no support and the birds and the monkeys can attack you from behind. You could possibly use a curtain to block the back, but it will shroud your room in darkness. Never sleep with your head against the door because this means all the energy from the door will attack your face, ensuring a restless night. Never sleep between 2 doors because the path of movement around your bed will also make your sleeping experience very restless and unpeaceful. Never sleep against a toilet because the toilet energy will make you sick in the form of moldy water and damp. You could put your bed over here if it's far from the toilet, or you could put your bed over here if you can put some kind of protection or a big nightstand next to your bed to make the door feel further away. If you don't mind being single for life, you could put your bed over here, which is alright. If you must put your bed over here, you must actually erect an entire wall in front of your bed so that you will not die. So now you know.
Okay, so I came across this, the Dear Modern Guy, quite a while ago when I was researching about Feng Shui. And it reminded me of a case that we had with a client where as you can see, there's very limited positions that you can do with a bed in a very small room. And especially in Korea where they're all apartments and they're all built the same, there's a lot to consider.
咁我就諗翻起一個個案啦，咁就係、因為其實我哋喺韓國咧嗰啲單位好多都係一式一樣，咁我哋嗰啲擺位咧其實都係有限嘅，我哋好多嘢要考慮。
So the bed position is one of the most important things in feng shui, I guess. And with one of the clients, we suggested a certain direction of the bed just because at least it's not the worst position. Also in terms of how you feel when you enter the bedroom. But the client insisted on a different direction, and so we put it in that direction. But they called us later saying, "Oh, my husband's having nightmares." And so we suggested that they turn the bed in the direction that we originally suggested. And then they called us back saying, "Oh, he's having great night sleeps." So I think it's very interesting to see. Maybe it's placebo, but also, yeah, it was an awkward position in the first place, the one that they wanted. So I do think it has a lot to do with beliefs, if you call it that, but also, yeah, as I said earlier, and as we've been talking about, how you feel. And I think the good feng shui masters as well, after they guide where you want, how the positioning should be, they always ask the client, do you feel comfortable now with this position? And I think that's super important.
我哋去提議佢點樣擺嗰張床嘅時候咧，其實我哋都有個建議俾佢，咁但係咧佢最後冇採用咧，因為佢好堅持要用翻自己嗰個方向嘅。咁後來咧佢就又打翻俾我哋啦，話：哎呀，我先生夜晚發惡夢啊，咁啊可能嗰個擺位唔係幾好。最後咧佢就將嗰個位置，即係嗰張床咧擺翻去我哋建議嗰個位置啦。之後佢又同翻我哋講話：哎呀，之後佢瞓得好好啦咁樣。咁所以咧有時可能我哋要考慮嘅都係嗰個用戶梗係用得舒唔舒服，佢哋嘅感覺係點樣？同埋雖然有時咁樣講可能只係一種心理安慰啦，咁但係其實最終都係要配合翻佢哋自己個人嘅需要去做。
咁其實啱啱 Eugene share 個 example， 我覺得都有啲同我頭先講嗰個有啲似嘅，就係即係你究竟要聽幾多，然後你自己亦都最後其實 fundamentally 其實你係應該要相信翻自己個感覺，即係我覺得嗰啲嘢都係一個 advice 啦。咁另一樣嘢，我覺得帶到落去嘅就係、其實呢樣嘢都關於中西兩個文化上有啲對比，因為我自己譬如即係相信 astrology 星象學咁樣樣啦，但係其實星象學嘅星盤咧，亦都會好似紫微斗數嘅有某啲位，因為其實你都係用緊同一個天空去睇。咁但係我自己就會 prefer 西洋嘅星座學嘅原因係因為我覺得大家個信念有少少唔一樣嘅。我自己睇有陣時，我有啲 friend 讀紫微，佢會講到啲嘢好死嘅，即係你好似嗰個時間出世就係咁樣樣。但係你如果話西洋占星學嚟講咧，反而或者係我嘅 at least 我學嘅 from 個 mentor 學翻嚟就係、佢其實只不過係一啲嘢去到 support 你一啲 framework， 而 ultimately 係你自己選擇去點樣 go through 成個 journey 咯。咁我覺得呢兩樣嘢有個對比喺度，所以而家 do you want to translate 我？OK，and 咁其實我諗而家我反而就想問翻佢哋兩位係喺設計或者藝術上咧。其實你會唔會都 feel 到一個中西上面文化嘅對比，而點樣影響到你個設計
design, do you feel the contrast between the cultures of the West and the East?
其實好得意嘅，即係如果簡單嚟講，係咪淨係中西文化嘅對比咧？其實我發現係再複雜好多嘅，即係譬如原來 let's say 個四字，好攞數字嚟講先啦，四字大家覺得。中國人覺得唔吉利，日本人、韓國人都覺得唔吉利嘅喎，因為都係死聲，係啦。但係同時間個13就係因為 Christianity 或者一個666，佢代表係 evil 嘅，咁喺佢哋嘅 culture 裏面又覺得唔吉利。 咁可能有啲數字譬如去到中東嘅，咁去伊斯蘭文化，佢哋又會睇好唔同嘅事情，可能7係佢哋嘅 lucky number。咁所以其實喺好多唔同嘅 culture 都會有唔同嘅 interpretation on 一啲設計嗰度咯。咁我哋喺唔同嘅項目裏面就要好小心，唔好踩地雷啦。即係每一個 culture 都有佢要知嘅嘢咯。
I think it is more complicated than just the contrast of cultures between the West and the East because, for example, in Asia, 4 is considered a very unlucky number because it is correlated to death. And in the West, 13 is a bad number. But in some different culture, like the Islamic culture, 7 might be considered a lucky number. So when we are creating a design, we have to make sure we are not falling into the traps of those cultural beliefs.
我講多少少關於呢個項目啦，係啦，睇下未必回應到呢個問題，但係想分享嘅就係好得意嘅呢個項目就係好多香港人會覺得特別係香港啦，會覺得譬如 open kitchen 係唔好嘅，咁好多，但係其實咧你喺韓國喺日本你會見到好多 open kitchen 嘅，喺西方更加係啦。咁我自己一路都係用 open kitchen。咁譬如呢個例子就係我哋本身未裝修之前，佢係有 enclosed kitchen 嘅。咁我哋之後我哋開放咗個 kitchen， 好寬闊啦，好陽光啦。我哋連洗手間都開放埋嘅，係啦，喺右手邊。咁其實成件事係好，我哋嘅今次呢個 project 嘅 client 咧，佢真係中西合璧嘅，因為佢哋係 mix 嚟嘅兩個都係啦。咁但係佢哋係好同我哋做呢個 project 嘅時候，佢哋好清楚知道，佢就想開放一個好大嘅空間，呢個就係令到佢哋最舒適嘅環境。
I would like to share this project with you. It might not be relevant to your question. A lot of people in Hong Kong think open kitchen is not favorable, but it is not the case in Japan or Korea or in the West. So I also have an open kitchen myself. So in this project, before the renovation, the kitchen was closed, and afterwards, when we redesign it, it is renovated, and you can see that in the slide, it has an open kitchen, and you can even see the toilet is also open here.
係啦，但係個toilet 我哋有啲 panel 可以 enclose 翻去嘅。咁原本嗰個廚房啦，原本個洗手間佢 enclose 嘅，但係你會唔會中意喺裡面咧？定係我哋裝修完嗰個樣咧？咁我哋設計完嗰個樣，其實我哋個 shower 啊、toilet 啊、kitchen 啊，全部可以打開啦，成間屋都係可以變形啦。咁可以有好多唔同嘅狀態俾個 client 去再 customize 嘅。咁而呢個 client 咧，其實佢都唔係佢住咗冇幾耐都要搬啦，因為佢即刻有小朋友，亦都即刻升埋職咁樣，係咯。咁我唔知係咪好風水定壞風水啦。
And well, actually, the toilet can be enclosed with a control panel. So, but we are offering some customization options to our clients, so they can control how the apartment looks like. But my client moved out very quickly after the renovation because he got a kid and probably got promoted, and then he moved out.
So I don't specifically have a slide for this, but I guess to add on to what Otto was talking about, I think when I talk about postmodern feng shui in my work, it's a lot to do with the fact that our lifestyles have changed. A lot of people, I also think the commodification of feng shui has grown because we're dealing with limited way of, for example, apartment blocks. You know, they're all designed the same way, and what we can do inside the space is very limited. I mean, if the property is already built, there's no way of having a river in front of you and a mountain behind you. So I think it's also people are trying to find new ways to adapt to our lifestyles now, but so I think it's also why it's very difficult. We're trying to adapt to it, but also how is it the right way to do it, and what we shouldn't do is very difficult to really know, and it's difficult as designers to adapt to this as well.
其實我哋做設計嘅時候咧，我哋更多係改變嗰個生活方式，係多於嗰個建築本身。因為其實嗰棟建築起咗之後咧，我哋好難再改變佢結構。大家都見到嗰啲單位其實好多都係一式一樣嘅，佢係背山面海啊，定係背海面山，其實佢哋起完嘅時候已經係決定咗啦。所以我哋可以做嘅咧，只係好有限嘅。我哋純粹係睇可以點樣可以令到嗰個客人係用得更加舒適咯。咁呢個對於設計師嚟講，其實係一個好大嘅難題嚟嘅。
Okay, so I guess, yeah, I can talk a bit about this. So when I was researching about feng shui in the West, what I realized was that it especially became popular in around the 1980s, which was the new era. And that's also when Trump was a very big, successful businessman, and he was building his Trump Tower, and he said somewhere on media, you don't have to believe in feng shui. I can't say it. I just know it brings me money. So he has a feng shui master, and with Trump Tower in New York, he took her around. Also, I think his father was a feng shui master, so she was one of the first women feng shui masters to be very successful or known. And she said, I think this Trump Tower is facing Columbus Square in New York, and she said, oh, the traffic is too much, it's too fast. It's good to have a Golden Globe. So there's a big Golden Globe in front of Trump Tower as well. But because people like Trump, who are very successful, has a lot of money, they come on media and say things like, oh, this quote, people start to believe in it. And it's the power of media, and it's the power of this idea of having quick fix to success, which is what I'm also criticizing, and also why the commodification of feng shui has become so large.
May I ask what came after the Trump?
There's a Golden Globe.
Golden Globe.
Yeah, to slow down.
Oh, I see. Okay. 咁喺80年啊，其實我做去調查一下呢個西方嘅風水文化嘅時候咧，我就揾到呢一個案例咧。咁當時咧就係1980年代啦。咁大家都好熟噶啦，特朗普即係 Trump 咧嗰陣已經係一個好成功嘅商人啦。佢都信風水嘅，咁嗰陣佢就講過一句説話咧，就你哋唔需要相信風水，但係我咧風水唔需要你哋相信先至可以產生作用啊。我就知道咧，佢係可以為我帶嚟財富嘅。咁其實唔止佢咧，佢爸爸咧都係信風水嘅。嗰個風水大師咧，就係第一個成功啦，同埋係知名嘅風水女性嘅風水大師嚟嘅。咁佢哋喺呢個Trump Tower 嗰個即係佢嗰棟大廈嗰度前面咧，就話因為嗰啲交通係非常之繁忙啦，佢哋就放咗一個金球喺前面，咁就係放慢咗嗰個交通嘅流動。咁所以其實同埋咧，因為係一個咁知名嘅人去講呢句説話咧，好多人又好中意佢啦，咁所以佢哋都係傾向於係相信因為佢哋相信，所以其他人亦都跟風去跟住相信啦。所以我覺得媒體帶嚟嘅影響其實都係好大嘅。
So I guess with the contrast of the East and the West, of the cultural beliefs, I feel like the Western people are also very interested in the Eastern cultural beliefs, but the understanding that they have is much more on the surface level, and because, for example, Trump has a lot of money, so he can hire these feng shui masters, but the majority of the people don't, so it becomes a DIY feng shui, which is why, the problem that I'm criticizing of commodification and the consumerist feng shui market happens. So I think it's also in the West, obviously there's also religious buildings that have a lot of symbolic reasons why, for example, churches are built with a cross plan. But yeah, it's interesting to see the Western perspective of an Eastern practice and how they interpret it in a new way.
講到中西文化對比咧，其實喺風水呢方面咧，我覺得西方人係對風水好有興趣嘅。咁但係即係唔係個個都好有錢，就好似 Trump 咁可以自己請一個風水大師翻嚟幫自己去做設計啦。咁所以咧，其實喺西方咧就有一種風水商品化嘅趨勢，即係佢哋會有啲風水嘅產品可以買到啦，同埋佢哋都係以一種 DIY 即係自己搞嘅形式去做嘅。然後咁咧其實我哋都見到呢個現象好有趣嘅，就係西方係以一種點樣嘅形式去演繹翻我哋東方嘅呢種文化理念。
咁我諗而家節目時間都差唔多啦。我覺得其中有一個最後嘅問題想總結翻，其實反而係即係當你諗下所有風水玄學，甚至乎一啲 spirituality 一啲靈修上嘅嘢，其實佢哋最初都係源於一啲 religious 嘅空間嘅某程度上。咁譬如你可以見到教堂，又或者一啲寺廟，其實佢哋係有特定嘅方位啦，又或者有一啲特定嘅平面上嘅分佈，因為佢想去塑造到有一個特別形式嘅 journey， 你究竟去經歷啲乜嘢嘅 space from 一個去到另一個。所以我都想另一個問題就係其實大家喺設計上面，又或者 Eugene 其實本身個 artwork 都係啦，其實會唔會有冇話點樣可以解釋你點樣去用一種風水又或者 spirituality 一啲靈修上面嘅嘢去塑造一個藝術作品嘅 experience， 又或者空間上嘅設計嘅一啲例子呢？
Metaphysics, spirituality and feng shui, all those actually originate from some religious spaces like church or temples, and all those architecture actually have their own very specific, they have their own specifications, like they have to be placed in a certain spot and they have to distribute the space in a certain way. And I would like to ask how you use the
Or maybe how do you actually use spirituality or the feng shui or the kind of cultural beliefs to generate design? How do you actually translate that, for example, in your artwork when you try to think about this in relation to the journey or experience of the users?
I guess it's always difficult to translate it into design because design is usually something that is tangible, and this cultural and spirituality thing is very intangible and abstract. So I think you need a different approach, a new perspective of how you see it to be able to illustrate to the audience. So, for example, in my work, Capturing Qi, I took a very Western design approach. So I took a very scientific approach, which allows for people to believe or to understand a bit clearer because it's such a difficult concept, especially to the Western people. Like feng shui a lot of people actually know about feng shui, but it's very limited. So I needed a way to find a way that allowed them to understand a bit more easily. And I guess with the work that I have at Detour, it was because the scientific approach was because actually maybe you can just say out to share.
其實我覺得比較難嘅，其實因為風水同埋其他嘅一啲叫做靈性少少嘅呢啲文化理念咧係睇唔到嘅，但係設計咧係我哋實質可以見到、可以摸到嘅嘢，所以我哋點樣可以將一啲睇唔到嘅嘢轉化做一啲睇到嘅嘢咧，其實係比較難嘅。咁可能我哋就要改變一下我哋嘅做法同埋我哋嘅角度啦。喺我喺外面嗰個作品叫做 capturing 氣呢個作品嗰度咧，我就用咗一種比較科學嘅演繹方法啦，去幫助一啲西方嘅人去了解咩叫氣咧，同埋風水。其實西方人有啲都係知道風水咩，但係可能就唔係好熟悉，唔係好認識得好詳細。咁所以我哋可能要用一種另外一種角度去教佢哋，即係點樣用一種睇到嘅形式去了解呢一種嘅理念。
Yeah, so the scientific, it looks like a scientific apparatus, and it's because when qi was first introduced to the West, it was understood as a sort of gas. So they also, yeah, it was around when oxygen was first invented, and oxygen is also a gas, it's also invisible, and the only way we knew that it existed was because there was combustion inside these scientific apparatus made out of glass and metal and rubber. So through these devices, we were able to believe that something existed. And that was my approach. I needed something that could convince people that there was qi inside. And yes, it's a bit of a joke, but I think it gets the idea across.
咁氣體氣呢個概念進入西方嘅時候咧，其實當時啲人就係將佢理解為氣體啊 gas 啊。咁當時咧就係咁啱即係大家係發現有氧氣呢回事嘅時候，就差唔多喺呢個時候即係啲氣呢個概念就進入西方啦。咁當時大家係因為有一啲器皿啦，有啲鐵啊、玻璃啊咁樣嘅器皿，去幫助我哋去理解咩係氧氣，咁所以其實佢哋先至有呢個咁嘅概念出現。咁所以我都希望可以用翻同一種方法，就係利用呢啲咁嘅工具咧，去體現翻氣嘅存在。聽落好似有啲搞笑，但係呢個就係都係一個可能嘅做法。
我會講一講嚟緊呢，仲有 sorry 上一個 OK， 咁想講一講，即係譬如我哋做設計啦，好多時其實講緊嘅希望有個好和諧嘅環境啦。咁我哋亦都有個信念係，只要個空間咧，其實係越簡約、越斷捨離咧，你會感覺越舒適嘅。咁譬如我哋呢一間係 Comma 係我哋 studio 裏面嘅一個對外開放嘅 cafe 啦。咁其中一個我哋好用心去做嘅就係將台面嘅拎走晒，係啦，即係盡量越少嘢越好啦。咁個感覺你就會覺得會更加之安靜啦，更加之平和啦、舒暢啦。但係同時間你就會欣賞仲喺度嘅一啲東西，譬如一杯好嘅咖啡啦，點樣做出嚟啦，或者可能同我哋咖啡師有個好好嘅對話啦。咁呢啲都係我哋好希望減至到最重要嘅東西留翻喺度咯。咁呢方面可能對同某一啲宗教，可能佛教都會有一啲關係。
So in design, what we want to achieve is to create a comfortable environment, and one of the elements is being neat and clean. So in this project, you can see that it is an open cafe. We put a lot of efforts in removing all the unnecessary items on the table and desks. So the users can focus on what is still existing, a cup of good coffee, and conversation with the barista. So yes, okay.
係啦，咁其實好多我哋 Comma 其實個概念都係希望可以同個 Comma 個 symbolism 我而家講，同個 Comma 個 symbol 係有啲關係啦，即係希望做咗一個可以俾大家 pause 係有休息嘅一個優質嘅一個環境啦。但係同時間係有 connected 啦，可以引領你從上一個嘅旅程去下一個旅程啦。咁對於我哋嚟講，就係一個安靜啦、舒適啦、平和嘅空間啦，就透過物料啦、光線啦同埋植物啦，去做一個有生氣得嚟，但係同時間好平和舒適嘅一個好舒心嘅一個環境咯。
So in this environment, you can rest and you can prepare for your next journey. We try to use the materials and the lighting and the plants to make you feel more comfortable. And yeah, it can give you peace.
咁我諗其實頭先 Eugene 嘅佢嘅 artwork example 啦，又或者 Otto 講呢件事，我諗其實道出咗一樣嘢咧，係其實 spirituality 又好，風水又好，belief 都好，好多時可能佢對 design 嘅影響並唔係一啲咁 literal 嘅嘢，即係我覺得如果你直接去將一個 system copy 咗落去另一度嘅時候，其實嗰樣嘢可能未必真係會 work 得最好喺嗰個 context 入邊對你自己，反而因為我自己另外都有喺 ConU 教書咧，其實我今年做有個 studio 都係即係同佢哋嘅生活一樣，係你點樣去 translate 嗰啲一啲嘢。你譬如靈修上面其實係講緊好多唔同嘅哲學或者信仰嘅時候，其實嗰啲咁嘅理念背後係點解，而你 understand 咗之後，你某程度上可以用新嘅一個角度去重新演繹嗰樣嘢。其中我有個學生做嗰個 work，我好記得嘅咧係，佢 study 咗一個 church 嘅 layout， 咁其實係一個佢有4個唔同嘅入口啦。咁佢後來就發覺其實呢個 church 特別嘅地方就係嗰4個入口其實係 for 唔同嘅人去入去，但係同時咧呢4個入口係從來都唔會同時開出嚟嘅。因為佢其實係唔同時間、唔同時段嘅 usage， 咁某程度上佢拆開咗咧，你就會見到好似係將兩個教堂其實係喺 exist 喺兩個空間，幫佢搭埋咗一齊，而去做到嗰一個 user journey， 亦都 tie to 到成個教堂嗰個 hierarchy 啦。咁佢就將呢樣嘢去再 translate 咗落去，應用咗喺一間酒店入邊咯。因為其實酒店你就會見到都係講緊唔同嘅 user group。而你點樣去話到俾啲人聽有嗰一個 spiritual 嘅感覺？你行入去嘅時候，我係進入緊一個教堂又好，一個 ballroom 都好，其實就係將嗰兩個咁樣嘅 symmetry 嘅 access， 一個就係俾個 guest 用嘅，另一個就係俾啲 staff 啊或者啲 priest 用嘅。咁佢就可以 connect 到落去一個 ballroom 又好，或者一個教堂又好，而喺一個酒店嘅 context 入邊，其實好 make sense， 因為你會忽然間覺得成個 design 其實佢係由教堂嗰個 access去到 develop 出嚟，但係佢變咗做一啲好 modern， 但係亦都好啱嘅，就係一個酒店入邊，佢究竟個 ballroom 同佢嗰個 wedding 嘅 chapel 嗰個 layout 究竟係點樣可以用到喺一個酒店嘅空間入邊咯。咁，sorry， oh maybe I can do it 。Because I was saying what Eugene's and Otto's example was interesting in a way, how they try to translate something that's related to spirituality or feng shui, but then they don't take it literally. They actually put in another layer of understanding and try to extract what's the essence of it. And then they kind of recreate a new version of what that used to be. And that actually would be much more successful or even impactful in the modern context, because the audience suddenly find it a lot more relatable. And in a way, like from one of my teaching experience with my student at Hong Kong U, he actually studied a church where it has 2 axes and it's completely based on symmetry with 4 entrances. And each of them are dedicated to a specific group of user. But then the way she translated that chapel was not by copying it, but she managed to study that layout and then try to extract the symmetry out of it and apply it into a hotel tower for his design, where the symmetry will kind of indicate one axis is actually for the guests that will get into a church and a ballroom, and then the other axis is for the priests and the staff that they will get into the church and the ballroom too. So it's like a front of house and back of house axis. But he actually got that whole cruciform idea out of a church, but then he translated it into the contemporary context and make it useful in a hotel context. Yeah. So I guess today that's kind of like what we want to share, is how spirituality in a way could be inspirational, but you really need to like have an understanding of it and translate it into something that is contemporary, but instead of just like blindly following all the traditions.
好，咁今日我哋其實講嘅咧就係主要都係點樣可以將靈性呢啲咁抽象嘢，就我哋唔係直接將呢樣嘢就係即係我哋可以將佢當係一種啟發同埋靈感啊，但係我哋唔可以將佢直接搬落我哋嘅設計裏面，我哋要揾一種方法去將佢轉化成為我哋嘅設計。
係咯，我補充少少啦，即係我覺得其實對我嚟講去做設計嘅，我最想就係 achieve 一個好舒心自然 開心嘅空間啦。咁未必需要話加好多唔同嘅工具去令到你會個風水運氣好好嘅。而我覺得最緊要就係你喺嗰度，你覺得自在舒適係首要咯。你如果加好多嘢都未必有用咯。咁最了解點樣先做到嘅，當然你可以揾你嘅設計師同埋你自己去試下唔同嘅擺法，令到你整體嗰個生活環境都會好舒適咯。
So in my design, what I focus on the most is the comfortable environment, which can make you peaceful and cheerful. And I don't think adding too much other elements like feng shui into it might be very conducive to your living environment. So you have to think about how, of course, your designers probably knows the best, but you can also try to position your furniture in different ways to try which way works for you the best.
I guess, yeah, same with me, as Otto said. It's important that it's all about, you need to adapt to what you have. It's difficult to keep a space clean if you consume all these feng shui objects and place it in your home. So yeah, it's all about the balance. It's all about how you feel, and know that it's not the possession of things that can, solve your problems in life.
所以其實最終都係講緊你自己個人嘅感覺咯。我哋係點樣適應嗰個環境，同埋係我哋點樣去解決我哋生活裏面嘅問題。
咁我諗而家其實 before Eugene 帶大家去真係睇個 artwork 嘅 tour 之前咧，而家有大概5分鐘到嘅時間可以睇下有冇大家有啲咩問題想問下 Eugene 又或者 Otto 嘅。
我喺位講係嘛？咁其實其實我唔係問問題，我想有少少 sharing。如果你唔介意嘅話，其實咧，我覺得即係如果有關靈性同建築藝術啊等等咧，其實有好多嘢係講嗰樣嘢最緊要，我覺得啦係真誠嘅，真誠係最緊要嘅。因為其實你如果 imagine 當初建立一個風水系統嘅人咧，嗰個祖師爺啦所謂，其實佢真係感應到嗰樣嘢。佢即係感應到嗰樣嘢，唔係用頭腦，係用自己心靈去感應到嗰樣嘢，而 develop 咗系統出嚟。咁一路傳落去嘅時候，由第2代、第3代咧，其實都個別咧要需要自己去內證，即係自己裏邊要感應翻同一樣嘢，去 verify 嗰樣。如果佢感應強嘅話咧，佢甚至可以再 improve 或者 fine tune 嗰套理念 ，so that 去傳落去啦。但係今時今日好多時，我聽好多所謂風水師傅講嘅咧，其實話依書直說。即係我都唔知點解嘅，總之上面傳落嚟咁啊咁啦咁樣。但係個問題就係咩咧？佢完全感應唔到嗰樣嘢啦。嗰樣嘢傳落嚟經過咁多代，係咪有問題咧 ？choose 咗係點樣咧？咩係得，咩係唔得咧？佢都唔知，佢所以 fine tune 唔到，係冇可能 fine tune 到。同埋咧，你會睇到咧，你問10個風水師傅咧，可能10個風水師傅講嘅嘢都係唔同㗎。所以點樣先係真咧？當然你有啲嘢係可以感應到，譬如話頭先講擺張床係好容易感應到啊，嗰樣嘢即係體現到係舒服啲。但係即係中國嘅，如果講風水唔係咁簡單，佢仲有好多方位啊，好多嘢啊要考慮噶嘛。咁嗰啲嘢你見唔到嘅嘢，同你見到張床其實嗰樣嘢唔同啊。所以你要講緊嗰個層次嘅風水咧，其實係去到依個 moment 咧，其實某程度上嚟講咧係好難去 sustain 到，因為冇辦法 improve， 冇辦法 refine， 除非佢自己修行啦。即係收翻個嘢，令佢感應翻嗰樣嘢，佢就唔同啦。即係可以講到出嚟，但係好多太 intellectual，佢就感應唔到啊。太用頭腦嘅人咧，就會變咗失去咗個感應。個問題喺呢度。咁但係咧，而家現代嘅風水咧點樣 apply 咧，就慢慢由中國嘅一套風水就變咗西方接手嘅。嗰中國同西方其實都有嘅。不過中國咧就從感應開始，西方咧就從科學開始嘅。即係科學點樣咧？譬如中國就講啲方位等等啦，但係西方都有譬如星象。或者其實更加 scientific 咧，就係我講有啲 grid 啊 ，earth grid 啊，即係 earth grid 有啲 interception point 就變咗係嗰啲能量中心點。喺地球嘅好多位就有特別有啲能量中心點嘅，譬如我哋講緊 Stonehenge 啦，或者講緊金字塔啦，嗰啲就能量中心點喺度咧，特別 empower 個能量。其實嗰樣嘢點解話 scientific 咧？因為其實你實際上而家西方 develop 到啲儀器咧，係可以 test 到個能量強弱。個能量唔單止 test 強弱，同埋個能量係邊種狀態，能量咩 frequency、咩 vibration 係可以 check 到嘅。 變咗喺咁嘅層面底下咧，我哋有信心就話，嗰啲嘢可以 apply 喺我哋嘅 works 裏邊。咁呢個就係講緊西方點補足到中國呢一種正做咧話唔知咩方位唔知得定唔得嗰樣嘢咧，都可以用嗰個方法去可以 testify 得到，可以用得到出嚟，即係 apply 到出嚟。咁另一樣嘢咧就係而家直至 up till now 咧都好少人 talk about 嘅有關風水。其實風水人哋講緊就係一種能量，所謂氣其實係一種能量，即係 chi 就係一種能量，或者 prana 係一種能量。嗰能量其實講緊用西方係 test 到嘅，即係唔係肉眼見到，譬如電波都係能量嚟㗎嘛，好多嘢都係能量。其實而家科學發展到其實可以 test 到呢個能量。咁你講緊頭先嗰外圍嘅能量已經 test 到，譬如 grid 嗰樣嘢啦，同埋有方法去抑制一啲負能量啦，有方法嘅。咁除咗擺方位之後啦，你仲可以擺好多嘢去抑制啦，同埋試到嘅，即係唔係話嗰樣嘢係得靠醫譯説，即係用咗 instrument 可以 test 得到。第一樣嘢好少人講緊嘅咧，就係話咧，其實人特別 architecture 就係話人嘅活動其實都係一個能量㗎，係一個最重要嘅能量添。所以啲人好多風水師就係講緊就係點 design 火個空間，點擺方位，就冇諗到用家點用個空間，個自己嘅 movement 人嘅 movement 點樣，人嘅 movement 就係一個能量體啊嘛。我日日喺度喐緊嘅時候，其實 generate 咗個磁場嘅，即係我點樣 plan 個 brood so that 人喺嗰度咧會 enhance 咗嘅 environment 咧，就冇人講過嘅，即係我自己諗出嚟嘅啫，呢個係。咁就係冇講過。另一樣嘢人嘅 habit，佢點 design 個 space 令到個 habit 係 benefit 到嗰個人本身。咁呢個喺 design 層面裏邊絕對可以反映到出嚟嘅。咁我覺得其實係即係而家講緊設計，其實都可以好 scientific。即係今時今日可能人未必有個感應。但係咧，就算用咗科學嘅方法咧，我哋都可以將佢 translate 咗變成一個 design language，可以 empower 到 user， 同埋話到 plan 點樣 empower 到佢咯，係。
有冇其他人有啲問題又或者？如果唔係咁，我諗都差唔多啦。其實多謝大家今日嚟聽呢個 sharing 啦。